Good afternoon students. Welcome to the maths class. Today in this class you will learn about the chapter lines and angles. In our previous class we have learned about some pair of angles, that is complementary angles and supplementary angles. So today we will discuss some more pair of angles, that is adjacent angles, linear pair of angles and vertically opposite angles. Let us first talk about what is adjacent angles. Two angles are said to be adjacent angles if they have a common vertex, if they have a common arm and the non-common arms are on either side of the common arm. That is, the non-common arm lie on the opposite side of the common arm. If these three conditions are satisfying, then we say that the two angles are adjacent angles, or the pair of angles are adjacent angles. Now let us see one example to understand when two angles are said to be adjacent angles. In the given figure, angle AOB and angle BOC are two angles which is named as angle 1 and 2. Now if you see the figure here, angle AOB and BOC both have the common vertex, that is O. So both have the common vertex O. So they have a common vertex, that is O. Now both have the common arm. Which is common arm? That is OB. Here OB is the common arm because AOB, in angle AOB, OB is present. Also BOC, OB is present. So OB is the common vertex. Sorry, OB is the common arm. So we write it here. They have a common arm OB. And the non-common arm. Which are the non-common arms? OA and OC. So the non-common arm OA and OC lie on the opposite side. That means they are lying on the opposite side of the common arm OB. So here all the three conditions are satisfying. That is, the non-common arm OA and OC lie on the opposite side of the common arm OB. So these two angles are adjacent angles. So we can say that angle AOB and BOC are adjacent angles. So two angles are said to be adjacent angles. Two angles are said to be adjacent angles if they have a common vertex, they have a common arm between the two non-common arms. So this is the very important points. Now in other words, we can also say that two adjacent angles have no common interior point. Suppose if I show one point in these angles, then this point is not common to the another adjacent angles. So two adjacent angles have no common interior points, or two angles do not overlap each other. These are the two important points. That means, in other words, we can say that interior of adjacent angles do not overlap. So two angles are said to be adjacent angles if they have a common vertex, they have a common arm, and the non-common arms are on either side of the common arm. Let's see some more examples to understand that when two angles are adjacent angles and when two angles are not adjacent angles. Now let us see another example. In this example, in the given figure, two angles are shown. That is, angle AOB is named as angle 1 and angle AOC is named as angle 2. Are these two angles adjacent angles? Let us see that angle AOB have a vertex O and angle AOC have a vertex O. So both have a common vertex, that is O. So both have a common vertex. Now AOB and AOC both have a common arm, that is OA. But the non-common arms OB and OC are on the same side of the arm, common arm OA. So here the non-common arms OB and OC are on the same side of the common arm OA. So this condition is not satisfying with the condition of two adjacent angles. That means here the non-common arms OB and OC are on the same side of the common arm OA. So we can say that these two angles are not adjacent angles because the non-common arms are on the same side of the common arm. Now let us see if any of the three conditions, if any one of the condition is not satisfying, then we can say that the two angles are not adjacent angles. Let us see another example. In this figure, ABC is named as angle 2 and BCD is named as angle 1. Are these two angles adjacent angles? See, in this first angle, the vertex is B and the second angle, the vertex is C. So they have no common vertex. So with one condition, if it is not satisfying, we can directly say that these two angles are not adjacent. But they have a common vertex, that is BC, and the two angles do not overlap each other. But as they have no common vertex, so we can say that these two angles are not adjacent angles. Come to the another example. In this figure, two angles are shown here, angle 1 and angle 2. That is AOD is angle 1 and BOC is angle 2. In these two angles, they have common vertex, that is O is common to both the angles, but they have no common arm. So we can say that these two angles are not adjacent angles. So if any one of the condition is not satisfying, out of these three conditions, what are the three conditions? They have a common vertex, they have a common arm, and the non-common arms lie on the opposite side of the common arm. If these three conditions are satisfying, then we can say that two angles are adjacent angles. Otherwise, they are not adjacent angles. We will discuss some more questions related with this. So let us discuss about. Now see, in this figure, here angle 1 and 2 is shown. So in this figure, are angle 1 and 2 are adjacent? Yes, angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent angles. Because they have a common vertex O, they have a common arm, this is the common arm, and the non-common arms are on the opposite side, of the common arm. So in other words, we can say that angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent angles because they have a common vertex and they have a common arm between the two non-common arms. So these two angles are adjacent angles. Now come to another example. In this figure, AOB and BOC, these two angles, AOB and BOC, these two angles have a common vertex O, they have a common arm OB, and they are lying between the non-common arms OA and OC. So these two angles are adjacent angles. But consider another example, BOD. BOD means this angle and BOC means these angles. Are these two angles adjacent angles? BOD and BOC, they have a common vertex, that is O, and BOD and BOC, that means OB is the common arm. So in this case, OB is the common arm. OB is the common arm. So this is the common arm. So in these two angles, O is the common vertex and OB is the common arm. The non-common arm OC and OD are on the same side of OB. They are not lying on the opposite side. They are on the same side of OB. So we can say that these two angles, that is angle BOD and angle BOC, are not adjacent angles. Because if the non-common arms are on the same side of the common arm, then we can say that these two angles are not adjacent. So if any of the three conditions, if any one of the condition is not satisfying, we can say that the two angles are not adjacent angles. Let us see another pair of angles, that is linear pair. What is linear pair? A linear pair is a pair of adjacent angles whose non-common arms are two opposite rays. Or in other words, we can say that if the non-common arms of the two adjacent angles form a line, then that two angles are said to form a linear pair. Look at this figure. In this figure, angle AOC and angle COB are two adjacent angles. Why these two angles are adjacent angles? Because they have a common vertex O, common arm OC, and the non-common arm OA and OB are the here the non-common arms OA and OB are on the opposite sides of the common arm OC. So why these two adjacent angles are called linear pair? Because the non-common arm OA and OB are the two opposite rays, or in other words we can say that the non-common arm OA and OB are they are forming a straight line. So when the two adjacent angles, so in this case the two adjacent angles are said to form a linear pair. So in other words we can say, if the sum of the measures of two adjacent angles is 180 degree, then such pair of angles are said to form a linear pair or linear pair of angles. So in this case angle 1 and 2 are two adjacent angles, so their sum is always 180 degree. If the sum of the two adjacent angles is 180 degree, then that pair of angles are adjacent angles are said to form a linear pair or linear pair of angles. So what is linear pair? A linear pair is a pair of adjacent angles whose non-common arms are two opposite rays. That means the linear pair of angles are always adjacent angles. They are two adjacent angles. In next class we will discuss more about linear pair and vertically opposite angles. Thank you.